Hello and welcome. This is a new video podcast, whatever you want to call it. We're going to call it the series, if it's a series. Maybe it's just one. We don't know yet. But we're going to call it, as of today, Chatting with Dave. It is a joint video cast between Talking Points and Let's Do Video. We've got Dave Maldow on the one end and Dave Michels on this end. And we're going to chat. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for agreeing to do this with me.
This is going to be fun. So we got a number of things to talk about. Let's start off. Let's start off going back to Enterprise Connect. We worked together on the Innovation Showcase. What'd you think of that this year?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for that opportunity. I really enjoyed that. It was a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to get to judge a few entries, take a look at their value, and have some fun, test some things out. But I was really surprised at what I saw. I didn't see a lot of people bragging about their technology. I saw a lot of people talking about the workflows they're enabling, what the customers can do with their solutions, the things that we've been begging them to talk to us about for decades now. So I was pleasantly surprised, and I had a really good time.
The Innovation Showcase has got this really interesting Taoism of opposites going on there, because Enterprise Connect is obviously an enterprise-oriented conference, and it's the big leagues. It's the keynoters are Cisco, Microsoft, Avaya. I mean, big companies and very enterprise focused. And the Innovation Showcase has always been, at least historically, always been more around startups and trying to give recognition to smaller young companies. This was the first year we allowed any size company to join, as long as they were new to the Enterprise Connect conference. But it's still this interesting thing where you get a lot of startups, and the startups are a bit challenged to deal with enterprises. There's I once read or once heard that businesses like to do business. Rephrase that. Companies like to do business with like companies. So big companies like to do business with big companies, and small companies like to do business with small companies. Mm-hmm. So there's always been that little bit of a challenge with Innovation Showcase, trying to recognize new ideas for a large audience.
And I think things have changed a little bit in that respect, because now, I don't know if it's because the technology has gotten so easy to work with, or because we have the flexibility is allowing for more creativity. But now we have ideas coming from these little guys that are interesting to the big guys.
The barriers to entry are falling apart between WebRTC, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and other exactly. Cloud services. You can actually build an enterprise class solution in your garage. You couldn't do that before.
Exactly. A little guy with some coding knowledge, and a couple of friends with some coding knowledge, and a little bit of financing can come up with something that's interesting enough that we care about it. 5 years ago, at an Innovation Showcase type event, I would want to know, what is Cisco doing? What is Polycom doing? What are the big guys doing? Because they were leading. But now you take something like one great example is Slack. I know that you like to tease me because Slack is a consumer tool. It's not enterprise ready. I use it, and you say, oh, that's right. You're a startup. You use it. So on the one hand, it wouldn't have been interesting to us before as a startup, but now you look at Cisco has persistent group chat. All these other big guys are having it. So maybe these ideas are coming from the little guys, which makes them a lot more interesting.
Yeah, actually, let me clarify that point, because I think a couple of things I just want to clarify. You made some accusations there. I just like to tease you because I like to tease people in general. But it's not. Slack is definitely ready for the enterprise. What I find most interesting about Slack is that they don't want to. They seem, and this is something that's been kind of in my mind lately, there's a lot of companies, Slack is one of them, Evernote's another one, Amazon kind of, which is an interesting case, but a lot of companies seem to be vehemently not branding themselves as enterprise. They're targeting startup communities. They're targeting Silicon Valley. They're trying to represent. Actually, Google's a great example. Trying to represent themselves as the anti-establishment players. And there's this interesting psychology going on, because clearly Google, clearly Amazon are huge vendors into the enterprise space, but they don't play that up. They really work hard to not be. They weren't at, well, Google was this year, but for the first time, they're not really at things like Enterprise Connect. It's this interesting psychology. It's almost like the enterprise is out for some reason. You don't want to be badged enterprise. It's like a negative thing. I don't really understand it, but it used to be a compliment. Now it's almost an insult. What do you think of that?
Yeah, maybe Google's a little too hip to be enterprise, but they clearly want to be enterprise. I mean, if you look at their portfolio and you match up against Microsoft, you got Excel and you got spreadsheets, you got Outlook, you got Gmail. They're matching them point for point.
Yeah.
But everyone's criticism of the Google keynote at Enterprise Connect was it was a great Google consumer presentation for consumers. They're a great consumer company, and they came and they gave a great message, wrong audience. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Great message, wrong audience. I haven't done the Google keynote yet, but I've been on Talking Points. I've been doing a blog post on each keynote, and Google's the next one I'm going to do. But that's kind of one of my takeaways. It's very much, it was a very appropriate, very great, very good keynote, but it fell flat on this particular audience that I think had a different expectation. But before we completely move off the Innovation Showcase, I just want for everybody to be on the same page. We had 7 companies in there this year, and I would never ask you, it's against my philosophy, I'd never ask you to name a favorite, but I am going to ask you in just a second, which one kind of surprised you the most? Which one kind of didn't fit the mold that you had, maybe that you were expecting? So let me just, the 7 companies are Fuse, Red Booth, and Red Booth, by the way, was just recognized by Google in what they do a Cool Vendors report every year. So Red Booth, Collaboration Squared, Nextplane, Phonami, Double Robotics, and Alto Cloud. Does any one of those companies stand out, not because they're best, but because they were a little different than what you had expected?
It's funny. I just happened to chat with a gentleman from Phonami yesterday, so maybe he's in my mind. I mean, I have a lot of friends on this list. I hate to really single one out. But if you're asking me, again, not in terms of favorite, but something just in my mind was from left field, it would have to be Phonami. I just wasn't expecting that. It's just may seem like a simple thing unless you've struggled with Salesforce yourself. But and I blogged about him, you blogged about him, there's other people blogging, people can check it out. But it was such a time-saving workflow thing as opposed to we had these protocols and this technology and this kind of coding. There was no there's technology to make it work, but that really wasn't what was important. It was a headache that I'm very familiar with, and I know a lot of other people were familiar with, and it was the aspirin for that headache. So I was interested in that one.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. You know, I think going into the showcase this year, we had prioritized collaboration as a key theme. And so I was expecting a bunch of what I call collaboration companies, and that was a fairly tight mold. Fuse, Collaboration Squared, Red Booth a little less, but those companies really fit that mold well. And so those weren't the surprises. To me, companies like Phonami or Nextplane or Double Robotics were really not in that mold at all. It's not what I was thinking that would end up in the showcase this year, but I think there's some great solutions. And collaboration is such a loosey-goosey term. You know, if you look up collaboration in the dictionary, it basically says 2 or more people working together. And it's like, well, that's a lot of things, right? And Alto Cloud, which I didn't call out, Alto Cloud is really the vendor and the customer working together. Like, what an interesting concept that is. And so I had this idea of collaboration being very well defined, video conferencing, messaging, a very defined space. And I think I was surprised by how broad it became in the showcase.
Yeah.
So,
and one final point on that, in terms of the pure collaboration companies, you mentioned the Fuse and Red Booth and Collaboration Squared. What I liked about those entries were previously innovation and collaboration has really been technical stuff. It's been 720p to 1080p. It's been this interop with that SIP trunking and all this important stuff, but boring stuff. And the guys that we looked at this year, they wrap it up in all this cool workflow stuff. There's a lot more going on than, yes, the conferencing part works.
All right, now related but new topic here. I want to move over to WebRTC. And I've got some opinions about this, and I have a feeling you do too. One of the things that's kind of bothering me is a number of posts that I saw after Enterprise Connect, a number of conversations that seemed to come out of Enterprise Connect was, wow, it's all about WebRTC. WebRTC has arrived. It's so much WebRTC. And I feel the opposite. I feel WebRTC is dead and gone and meaningless. And so I'll explain that thought in just a moment. But let me I'm going to throw that on the table and throw it back to you here. What is your take on WebRTC? Is it hype? Is it real? Is it a product? What do you feel? And did Enterprise Connect change that perception?
Yeah, I'll try to, and I'll answer that last part. Yes, just to get right to the point. Yes, it did change my perception. But now I'm going to take a little while to get there. I'm trying not to take too long because obviously I spent a lot of time thinking about this. There's two parts of the equation for me. One is the WebRTC dream, the browser-based video conferencing. That I can't get past that being a great thing. Yeah, video conferencing has been limited by how many endpoints there were, right? There was a one Polycom or Tamberg in your boardroom, and that's all the video conferencing your company did. Now that it's on everyone's phones and iPads, we're doing it more. And if it's on everyone's browser, as opposed to just being on the PC, actually being on the browser, obviously that's a huge deal. Now there's the reality. Forget about the dream of browser-based video conferencing, the reality of how WebRTC has been implemented today. Obviously I have problems like everyone does. It's not what we want it to be. There's too many problems. You wrote an article about why Spark works, Cisco Spark works completely in Firefox, but the video doesn't work. And I read it. It's complicated. It shouldn't be that complicated. That's part of it, the fact that it doesn't work. But also another problem I have with it is these great innovative vendors we have in our space that make these great products and great workflows and great UIs are not being allowed to make their own endpoint. If you're using WebRTC, you are using Google's endpoint. And geniuses at Google, they just haven't done a great job with it. It's not.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree. What do you mean by that? Google's endpoint.
If I use Polycom Real Present, they spent a lot of time thinking about where they're going to put the mute button. They spent a lot of time thinking about where they're going to put the screen share, and those things matter. And here's a great example. And it sounds like a little petty whine, but these things add up. Whenever I make a video conference, I'm never sure if I'm talking to this microphone or this microphone. And I put it on and I go to the settings menu and I choose my microphone or choose my camera. In WebRTC, that control is not part of the experience generally. Generally, the vendor, the WebRTC vendor, doesn't control that. There's a little button in your address bar and that does the microphone, but it doesn't do the speaker. So you got to go to your Windows settings. You know something? I used to work in a law firm. I don't want the lawyers touching their Windows sound settings. No, So the fact that, and when we've learned this, when you have a bad video conferencing experience and it's not bad, but less than ideal, it affects adoption. People have a bad experience and they say, I'm not going to use video conferencing. I'm going to go back to using the phone. So I'm frustrated by the fact that all of our great talent, design talent in our industry is not being allowed to make a browser desktop endpoint.
Well, actually, you're touching on two totally separate, in my mind, totally separate issues. The first thing you're touching on is browser-based video, which I think is separate than WebRTC. A lot of people don't, but I think that's separate than WebRTC. And then the second thing you're touching on is this, and I've actually written about this in a separate blog. I have no idea where I posted it either. I think it was not. I don't remember where, but a lot of vendors talk about video conferences should start on time, and everybody every year has a new technology that says it's going to start on time, and I know why meetings don't start on time. I've played around with this. I wrote a blog post about it. The reason meetings don't start on time is exactly what you're talking about: the audio video settings. And I've got, I think, 3 microphones on this computer, four microphones, webcam, headset, dedicated mic, and a secondary webcam. 4 microphones on this computer, and finding out which one is active is always a pain, and switching is always a pain, and finding which camera, I got 2 cameras, is always a pain. Now what happens is, if you work at a place that makes video conferencing software, video, Cisco, Polycom, etc., you tend to use your own technology, and you tend not to, you set it once and you forget about it. And as a user who I keep on getting invited to all these different kinds of meetings, I get invited to a link meeting, the next meeting is a Zoom meeting, the next meeting is a Hangouts meeting, and you just, everyone is like, oh, now I got to find my settings. And it's always a pain and you can't remember. So what I proposed in that blog post was there needs to be just a universal symbol, and it's usually the gear icon, but that's not even universal completely, but the universal symbol, and it needs to be in a universal place. All the vendors should just agree the gear icon is going to be in the top right corner at all times. Some vendors have the gear icon there only at setup. Some of them you have to get to a menu to get to it. You have to change things around, and that's to me the 15-minute delay factor. So that's kind of a separate issue than WebRTC in my opinion. The first issue about browser-based, so this is why I say WebRTC is dead. We've had video communications for a long time, and we've had clients that we install on our desktops. We've had room systems. Nothing is really fundamentally new. The big promise of WebRTC was indeed browser-based, but that didn't really work well on mobile. So Google released a mobile toolkit for iOS. Android's got toolkits. So now we're seeing client-based solutions in mobile. And it turns out that a lot of companies have found out, Cisco's one of them, with Cisco Spark, that, it might be better if we just had a client. And so they have a client and the client works on what they call WebRTC. So now we've got all these companies that have, so I don't know if WebRTC is a client or a browser. I don't know that, and in fact, I do know that companies say either is WebRTC. I don't know whether it means voice or video, because companies have, Avaya just launched full WebRTC compliant. They did it on the keynote stage, fully WebRTC compliant agent software, but it's audio only. So they mean audio only. Then I don't know what codecs it means. Cisco is using 264. Other companies are using VP8. We've got 265 on the horizon. We've got VP9 on the horizon. And people are using WebRTC to describe all this. So my problem with WebRTC is it's everything. It's not anything in particular anymore. And that's what we had before we had WebRTC. We had codecs. We had plugins. We had different things that were incompatible. We had different approaches to solutions. And so what is WebRTC? And how can Cisco Spark, who is fully compliant in Chrome with voice and video, not Chrome, Firefox, and we have Circuit, which is fully compliant in Chrome, both claiming to be WebRTC, both totally incompatible, no interface between the two. And so they're right. And as soon as you have that situation, as soon as you have companies that are fully compliant and fully incompatible, you have nothing. So WebRTC is nothing. And so when I read all these things that say, oh, WebRTC was everywhere, it was nowhere. There's no definition of WebRTC. I don't know what it means. There's no compatibility. There's no definition. That's my point.
Yeah, it's become, is it the new telepresence where the term is being used so incorrectly in so many different ways that we don't know what it means anymore?
I think it's a lot like that. And at least with telepresence, we kind of admitted it, right? But people won't admit it. I'm talking to some really smart people. Really smart people are writing blogs about how WebRTC was everywhere. And I was like, what's it look like? Because I couldn't find it. What is it?
In my mind, it's, I guess there's so many possible applications of it, but I'm on a website, whatever it is. And I think it's something like the Amazon with the Mayday. So I'm on Amazon and I want help, and I want video help for whatever reason. And when that video pops up, it just pops up. There's no plugins. There's no app.
Right.
Do people care if it says, please download this app to do video? Does that block adoption?
Well, regardless of whether you care or not, you may not be able to, right? So a lot of desktops are locked, a lot of environments are locked, and it's sometimes not practical. And so to WebRTC, to me, that's been the promise. The promise has been this that we can make an assumption, the developers can make an assumption, that vendors with their websites can make an assumption, that whoever is dealing with my website can now has the ability to talk real-time communications in voice or video. The reality is that we're no closer to that assumption than we were 10 years ago, because, if you look at WebRTC, you've got basically Chrome, which is, kind of associated with WebRTC. You've got Firefox, which has got the 264 from Cisco, but not VP8. Microsoft and Apple haven't done anything. And so until we could assume that a user on a desktop browser or even mobile browser has a real-time capable browser capability, WebRTC is nothing. And you know, we've always had plugins, and you know, the browser will keep on evolving. You know, the last round of this was Flash. You know, we couldn't do video in browsers until we had Flash. And then at first was a plugin, and eventually it got more or less built in, and now it's kind of on its way out. But it's just, you know, until the browsers actively on all of them embrace WebRTC, or rephrase that, VP8 and VP9 and Opus, excuse me, and 264 and Opus, we're no better off than we were, and that was the pitch. That was the pitch of WebRTC, is this universal, and it's not happening.
Yeah, it's you know, if you're using the right browser that's compatible with the solution and all this kind of stuff. But the one thing that makes me still kind of, and I'm known for being the optimist and the Pollyanna and wanting things to be good, but a lot of times I do test calls with people who aren't in the industry. I say, oh, you want to try this one, you want to try this one, you want to try this one. Whenever I give them a link to one of the pure WebRTC, no plugins, the Dexio has one, I think PECSIPS is, and they just click in and they just go right into a meeting with no, even if they're little plugins, but when they click and they go right in, there's a wow moment.
Okay, and my point is the wow moment is the exception, not the norm. But the second point that you raised is the bigger issue. The second point earlier in the conversation about picking your right devices. If you're on a laptop, and if you have a built-in camera and only one camera, and if you have a built-in microphone and only one microphone, then you might get that wow moment. Or maybe a tablet or something like that.
Right.
But realistically, it's not so simple, and most people have multiple AV devices, or certainly A devices in terms of audio, and the browser is not easy to change this stuff. I mean, maybe the next generation of the browser will make that easier, but as of today, you pretty much have to leave the application and go set these settings, and that's not intuitive.
Yeah, I wish Google would make it easier for, you know, for the WebRTC developers, the guys who are developing the actual apps and pages, to make the UI.
I think that's on the roadmap. I think that's coming, but again, a lot of WebRTC solutions are going toward clients, and so once you've gone toward a client, the whole point of WebRTC is kind of now it's just a matter of having free technologies that they can build into the client instead of licensing it, but you still got to download the client. And you know, Mayday, you mentioned earlier, is using WebRTC technology, but they're doing it in a client, in a hardware device that they've optimized for it. And so I think we're still pretty far away from the universal browser experience where it's intuitive. You know, and it's exciting how free codecs are making a difference. And in that sense, there was a lot of stuff at Enterprise Connect, a lot of new ideas, a lot of new applications, and the royalty-free environment is very exciting. I just wouldn't call it WebRTC because I just don't know what that means.
Yeah, you know, it's funny how I think it's not just us that's confused. I think everyone's confused. I was talking to a few of the vendors who, some of them are offering a client version and a WebRTC version, or a browser with plugin version, and I'm like, which is usually there's one real version and there's one convenience version. Which is the full featured version? What do you want your customers to use?
And you got mixed answers.
They don't know. You know, they're like, we have to offer both. We don't know what the world wants yet. So
yeah. No, I had a really good conversation actually with Biba, very similar to Slack, and Biba had told me, and I was talking to some of their folks there, and they said that the WebRTC version, which is what their initial vision was, had too many limitations for them, particularly around notifications and pop-ups and setting AV settings. And so they said they switched to a client using many of the same technologies, and they've had a better experience with that. And at the time when I had that conversation, they were the outlier. You know, now Cisco just did the exact same thing. They launched Project Squared as a browser-based only solution. They launched Cisco Spark as a browser-based or a client version. And is
the client out yet? I haven't tried that yet.
I actually haven't checked or tried, so I don't know.
I know it's coming coming soon or out already. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but it's the mobile paradigm, right? Because we've always talked about these. You know, the thin client world, but it doesn't seem, the web experience doesn't seem to do well in mobile devices, and everybody goes with clients. So if you're building a client, well, gosh, we may as well make it the same as the client as we have on our desktops, and so So again, I don't know WebRTC is nothing. It means nothing to me. When a company tells me that they have WebRTC or their solution is WebRTC compliant, that has told me zero. It doesn't tell me their codec. It doesn't tell me if they're web-based. If they are web-based, it doesn't tell me what browser they're using. It doesn't tell me if they're interoperable with anything. It means nothing. It absolutely means nothing.
It means I have a few more questions to ask.
It means I have a few more questions to ask, and it means that they were able to do something probably with free technology, either Open264 or VP.
It might mean they're doing something cool. It might mean they're innovators, they're clever, and there are some people doing some cool stuff out there. But
it's nothing to do with WebRTC. If they say they're not using WebRTC, we're doing it totally proprietary. You know what? It might be they're doing something cool. You know, it doesn't mean anything. It's just But all right, last topic. Last topic for chatting with Dave. Let's move to for the last 10 years. Instant messaging and presence has been a big deal. And now there seems to be a new term that is sometimes used synonymously and sometimes something very differently. And so let me get your take on this. What do you think of persistent group chat? Is persistent group chat the same as instant messaging or different? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been really, like you said, you know that I'm a fan. I've been playing with Slack, and I don't endorse any, so I switch between Akano and Slack and HipChat and Spark. I need to do a little more Spark because it's still kind of new. But I'm definitely a fan of it, and they might be two unrelated things, but it seems as though UC has always needed an anchor, you know, because it's hard to understand UC. It's a way to contact everyone in your lists on the right tools at the right time. So the anchor has been for a long time the concept of presence. And people were saying presence is the new dial tone. It's the central focus of how we're going to, and I just wrote a 3-part blog series about this. You guys can find it on letsdovideo.com. And the first part was presence, I'm over it. I just don't think it's that important. I don't think it's going to be dropped from the products anytime soon, but I don't think anyone uses it the way it was intended. It doesn't, and the example I give is, you know, I need to send a file to be reviewed by my CMO. If the light's green, I send her the file, and if she doesn't respond, I know she's not there. If the light's red, I send her the file, and if she was screening her call, she answers. I mean, I don't care if it's red or if it's green.
Okay, in that case, you don't care, and that's the beauty of asynchronous versus real-time communications. But certainly, there's cases where you do care. Hey, do you want to go to lunch? You know, hey, has the UPS come yet? Because I'm trying to get a package out. You know. Those kinds of things, any kind of question or query where you're more or less expecting a quick real-time, not in real-time, near real-time answer, where you could have used the phone, but that seemed a little too intrusive, and so it's kind of a one step back. I'm waiting for an answer. I'm going to sit here and holding my breath till you answer, but if you don't answer, I'll assume you're not there. That's where presence kind of is important, don't you think?
Well, and I do think there is a place where presence is vitally important, but I'm not sure if that's it, because if the light's red and I need that immediate to go to lunch, I'm still going to ask it, because sometimes people just leave their light red. I'll only wait a minute.
It's gray. It's gray. It's not. It's you're not logged in. Then you're not going to.
When my light's gray, I still get notifications on my phone. I'm still sending the message. I don't care if it's gray, yellow, red, green. I'm sending the message.
Wow.
Okay. But what I do think it's important for is for solutions like contact centers, because the call comes in, it got to be routed to the right expert. You need to know which experts have a green light, and those green lights really mean available.
Okay.
But I think the normal working person, maybe in some cases they'll know, you know, this person, when their light's red, they're really not there. But for the most part, you send the message, and when they get it, they get it. And if the light's red, a red light doesn't stop me.
Red light or gray light doesn't stop you. There's no stopping. Okay, so that's presence. So let's go back to.
Well, actually, more what really makes me think, because, you know, who am I to say? Look at Cisco and look at what Cisco's doing, right? Whatever Rowan Trollope is interested in, that's what's going to happen, right? He wasn't interested in 3/4 of their products, and they don't exist anymore. He's very interested in WebEx, so it's getting all these redesigns, all this money's being put into it. He's very interested in Spark. He keeps talking about it and presenting it. Everything's about Spark. He's very interested in the new MX products. I have not heard the word Jabber come out of his mouth in many a presentation. That's their present solution. If Rowan's not interested in it, I'm not interested in it.
Yeah, it is. It is one. Many people are wondering how much longer Jabber until Jabber and Spark are kind of folded together. Okay. So I started asking you about instant messaging and presence, and you answered about presence. Let's go back to instant messaging. So is instant messaging and persistent group chat the same thing in your mind or different?
Very similar, but they're different, and it's hard to explain the difference because when I use them, different things happen. An instant message, it feels like, and maybe it's the persistence, and I know the instant messages, they're persistent. If I go to my GChat and I click it, there's a button there, I could find a conversation I had with you 3 months ago. It's there, but it's not presented in that way. When I instant message you, it's like a one-time, it's like meeting you in a hallway. You know, I see you, hey, I got your attention, I want to tell you a bit this, that, and the other thing, talk to you later, bye, gone. And then it's done and it's over. For me, what I'm calling persistent group chat, it's not conversation-based, it's project-based. With my team, I have a room for sales, I have a room for podcasts, I have a room for content, I have a room for events. We talk in those rooms about whatever project we're working on at the time. So it's a different, it's a different workflow, it's a different result, a lot of different things happen. So I guess the short answer is I see a very vast difference from traditional instant messaging and this new persistent group dynamic, which is being tied into a lot of UC solutions.
Okay, all right, I go with that. I guess I'm not as comfortable with the term persistent group chat, but I know what you mean. And when I think about these messaging-based solutions like Slack and Spark and Circuit and HipChat and Interactive Intelligence's new Collaborate, and the list goes on and on, right? What I think the main difference to me is is what I call this distinction between inclusive and exclusive communications. And so, and it might be easier to use it with email as an example, but it applies to instant messaging as well. So if I send you an email, I have excluded other people. Let's say Joe. I've excluded Joe from that conversation. I've actively excluded him by inviting you, and I send you an email, and you reply, and we have this whole conversation. And during this conversation, we may have some incredible breakthroughs, and I explain to you that I don't like the term group persistent chat, and you say, okay, we'll use messaging-based communications. So we have this whole evolution of this conversation. Now, in email world, if we decide to bring Joe into the conversation, more likely it's going to be a new thread of communications, and Joe's not going to have visibility to that history. And honestly, if I send him that whole history, you might get pissed off. It's like, what? That was a conversation we had. You can't just send. I had my favorite color in there, and that's none of his business, and all that stuff. And so you kind of sometimes feel a little violated when people send off these private conversations to other people. We've all had that, and so it's different in a social environment, right? In a social environment, even if it's in a more or less closed environment, maybe it's close to your department or something like that, it's kind of out there. And even if it's a really closed conversation, like instant messaging, where it's just the two of us, I'm kind of, hang on, hold that thought. So the idea of a social conversation is you bring somebody into it, or they could join in on their own will, and they can see that history. So they can be included much easier, and that sense of violation isn't there. A really good example is reply all. Somebody puts out an email, has UPS come, and I can't stand the reply all. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. It's like, it had no information, interrupted everybody, it's an interrupt, it's a waste of time. But if you put it on social media, has UPS come, and somebody replies yet, I don't know yet, I've been looking myself, whatever, it's not as intrusive because I had to go get that information. I had to invite myself or insert myself into that stream. So to me, one of these things with Slack and Spark and, I just named them all, these solutions, is it's more inclusive, that you could bring people in, and that history, that point where I gave earlier about history, that we evolved the conversation, is out there for others to view And even if it was a private conversation and we brought Joe in, Joe can go back and see that history and say, oh, I understand how this evolved now and I understand the terminology. And so to me, it's really about inclusive and exclusive communications. So that's the email paradigm. If I go to the instant messaging paradigm, it's kind of the same thing, that we have private instant messages, we have history of instant messages, where these messaging-based solutions are more shareable, and instead of if somebody leaves the company, you delete all that history because it was their history and it was their private history. You delete all their accounts, their email, etc. All that's lost. Where in these new messaging environments, the history is more community-based, and if somebody leaves the company, you don't delete it all. It's out there, and maybe somebody says, well, you take over this room, for lack of a better metaphor. You take over this room, and here's all the history you need. So to me, it's more about inclusive and exclusive. They both have persistence. They both have groups. That's why I think it's confusing. It's more around whose conversation is it and privacy expectations.
It's interesting. I think I hadn't thought about it as much as I've been thinking about this. I hadn't thought about it. It really solves, in my mind, it kind of solves that problem that you get with email, which is, there's an email chain back and forth between us. We're talking about someone else, and then you forward it to that person. I might not have wanted to phrase things that way. Why did you do that? That happens all the time. And particularly, like you said, we want to get someone up to speed. The best way to get someone, if we've been working this project via email,
right,
that's the only way to get someone up to speed. But when I was writing those emails, I wrote them to you. They were not that wasn't a project workflow. That was a communication to you as a person. I'm uncomfortable with that.
And it's also the amount of emails, because it's not just one stream with a bunch of replies. Yeah. It could be totally different,
Well, and if you're on a team where we're working with 4 different people on 10 different projects, and these 2 are on this project and those 2 are on that project, you have emails going back and forth. Some, I didn't need to read that. Oh, I thought you were on that. But imagine if the emails, instead of being person-based, were project-based. And that's the way you set up your persistent group chat. You have a chat room for each project. Now, you don't have those issues, because when I'm typing in there, I don't have the mental image of sitting in your office talking to you. I have the mental image of sitting in the conference room with the doors and the windows open and everyone can see the blackboard.
Inclusive. So, it's inclusive. Exactly.
So, as I'm typing, I'm thinking if someone that I don't even know yet joins a team in 3 months, this is what I want them to see to get them up to speed. And it'll also allow for the social, because you know what? You have a channel that's called social.
Right.
You talk about stuff and you say, we're never going to let anyone in here see all private jokes until they're our trusted friend.
And so that's what happens, right? So if the conference room metaphor, Joe starts presenting or Joe starts talking and he's saying just these incredibly stupid things, I might instant message you privately that Joe is saying some really stupid things. That's not part of the conversation, right? And so that kind of whole thing gets imploded into email, into one stream, where in these messaging-based solutions, I might make a side comment about Joe in an instant message to you, not in that messaging-based stream.
Exactly.
It's because there's that expectation around privacy and again, what I call inclusive or exclusive communication.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. I think this wraps up our first and possibly last episode of Chatting with Dave. We'll see how.
I hope not. This was fun.
It is fun, and so a lot of good stuff to talk about, and it's great. It's great to take our audiences and domains and kind of bring them together to some degree. So very good, Dave, and we'll chat again.
Good talking to you. Take care.